With Stalin's death, the familiar world of the Soviet political elite, which had seemed unshakable, suddenly faced a profound power vacuum. This situation, like a sudden calm after years of stormy weather, not only caused confusion but also paved the way for new, sometimes quite unexpected configurations. It was at this critical moment that three figures, whose names were already well known in the corridors of the Kremlin, came to the fore, each with their own ambitions and ideas about the future of the country. They were Georgy Malenkov, Lavrentiy Beria, and Nikita Khrushchev. Georgy Malenkov, whose star had shone particularly brightly in the last years of Stalin's rule, took the key post of chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, thereby becoming the formal head of state. His office in the Kremlin, where the leader's voice had recently been heard, now received its first visitors, feeling the weight of enormous responsibility. Beria, a man whose name had long been associated with the most secretive and powerful structures in the country, took personal control of the unified Ministry of Internal Affairs, which absorbed the formidable state security agencies. In the first weeks after the leader's death, Malenkov and Beria gave the impression of being a united tandem. They appeared together in public, their statements sounding harmonious, like two strings of the same instrument. On the podium of the mausoleum during the funeral ceremony for Stalin, they stood side by side, their silhouettes visible to the whole country, conveying the appearance of unbreakable unity. Malenkov delivered the main speech, his voice solemn and mournful, and Beria spoke immediately after him, confirming their apparent unity before millions of Soviet citizens who were watching these events on the radio and in newspaper reports. These moments, captured on film and in people's memories, were intended to convince everyone of the stability of the new leadership. The merger of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of State Security gave Lavrentiy Beria truly unprecedented power, which no one else in the history of the Soviet Union had possessed, except perhaps Stalin himself during certain periods of his rule. The entire law enforcement system came under his personal control, like a huge, well-oiled machine. Intelligence and counterintelligence, border and internal troops, all these powerful structures were now subordinate to a single center headed by Beria. In addition, he was also in charge of the vast system of gulag camps, which spread across the country like an invisible web, trapping millions of lives in its nets. This was power equivalent to the ability to control not only the physical security of the state, but also the deepest fears of its citizens. What particularly alarmed his colleagues, including Malenkov, Khrushchev, and Molotov, was Beria's unlimited access to the state security archives. These archives, stored in dusty folders and safes, were a bottomless repository of secrets. They contained tons of compromising material, so-called compromat, on virtually every member of the country's top leadership. There was information about old mistakes, incorrect statements, personal blunders, denunciations, and suspicions. In these papers, one could find confirmation of any unreliability, any connection with enemies of the people. In an old, dimly lit office somewhere deep inside the Lubyanka, where these files are kept, each document is not just a piece of paper, it is someone's fate, someone's career, and sometimes even their life. And the key to this office, to all these secrets, was now in Beria's hands. This fact turned him into a figure capable of paralyzing or even destroying any of his colleagues at any moment. After all, the mere mention of the existence of such a file, even without it being made public, could sow panic and mistrust. This caused them not just apprehension, but mortal fear, because they knew that each of them was vulnerable and could become the next victim of this boundless and all-pervading power. Beria did not delay in demonstrating his new, almost absolute power. He immediately embarked on large-scale, sometimes shocking reforms. which he often carried out without fully coordinating them with the other members of the Presidium of the Central Committee. His actions were swift and decisive, as if he were in a hurry to consolidate his position while others were still reeling from the shock of the leader's death. One of his first and most notable steps was to decisively put an end to the so-called doctor's plot. He publicly declared it to be a fabrication, which came as a real shock to many. This plot, which had been gaining momentum in the last months of Stalin's life, accused prominent doctors, mainly Jews, of conspiring to assassinate Soviet leaders. Its sudden and categorical closure, coupled with the admission of falsification, was a blow to those who believed in vigilance and enemies of the people. Following this, Beria initiated a broad amnesty. The decree of 27 March 1953 released more than 1.2 million people, which was an unprecedented step in the country's history. This was equivalent to the release of the population of an entire large city, such as modern-day Novosibirsk. Imagine trains full of people returning home after long years of imprisonment, many of whom had been convicted on political charges. This event caused a wave of hope and, at the same time, confusion among the population, as such a large number of prisoners being released came as a surprise to many. But perhaps the most alarming thing for his colleagues was Beria's unexpected proposal on the German question. He was effectively proposing to abandon the construction of socialism in the GDR in favor of creating a unified, neutral Germany. This proposal, made at such a sensitive time when the confrontation between East and West was particularly acute, came as a real shock. These actions, especially with regard to Germany, were perceived by Malenkov, Khrushchev, and Molotov as a direct undermining of Stalin's foreign policy, as a threat to state interests and the established world order. In their eyes, Beria was turning from an ally into a kind of uncontrollable dictator, capable of reshaping the country and its foreign policy at his own discretion, without regard for anyone else. They began to seriously fear that this man, who had concentrated enormous power in his hands, was acting as a sole ruler, capable of steering the country in a completely unpredictable direction at any moment, threatening their own positions and the future of the state. The fear that Beria had skillfully cultivated over the years was now coming back to haunt them, only now it was directed at him. The scale of the threat posed by Lavrentiy Beria became clear to the other members of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. His rapid, sometimes authoritarian actions, his comprehensive control over the security forces, and, most importantly, his access to countless compromising materials created an atmosphere of unbearable fear and uncertainty. This was not just political rivalry, it was a struggle for survival, where everyone felt they were in the firing line. Nikita Khrushchev, a decisive and pragmatic man, was the first to actively begin plotting to remove Beria. He understood that there was no time to waste, that every day strengthened the position of the all-powerful minister, making him virtually invulnerable. However, Khrushchev also clearly understood that without the participation of Georgy Malenkov, who formally headed the state as chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, such a conspiracy was unthinkable. As head of government, Malenkov had the necessary legitimacy and authority to give future actions the appearance of legality rather than a mere coup. It was Malenkov who was to chair the meeting at which the arrest of the all-powerful minister was planned, which made his role absolutely crucial. Without his consent and active participation, the whole venture was doomed to failure, for he was the face of the new regime. For Malenkov, it was a truly difficult choice. He was one of those who had worked side by side with Beria for years, who shared the podium of the mausoleum with him, demonstrating unity. Now he had to betray this man. After some hesitation, realizing the danger both to himself and to the future of the country, Malenkov gave his consent and became an active participant in the conspiracy. His inner turmoil was probably similar to that experienced by a person who has to make a decision that goes against all his habits and even his instinct for self-preservation. He understood that maintaining the existing order, where Beria could destroy any of them at any moment, was much more dangerous than risking everything to eliminate him. To ensure the success of their plan, and, most importantly, to neutralize Beria's powerful security detail, which was known for its loyalty and numbers, the conspirators secretly enlisted the help of senior military figures. This was a step that required extreme caution and absolute trust. Among those recruited were such legendary figures as Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, whose authority in the army was unquestionable, and General Kirill Moskalenko. These men, hardened in the battles of the Great Patriotic War, were ready to act decisively. The military was the only force capable of effectively opposing Beria's department, whose internal troops numbered hundreds of thousands and whose personal guard was trained and armed to the teeth. This was not simply a matter of enlisting allies. It was a matter of creating a counterweight that could guarantee that the arrest would not turn into a bloody clash in the heart of the Kremlin. All details of the operation were kept strictly secret, and every step was calculated with precision because the slightest leak of information could cost them all their lives. The culmination of the tense secret preparations came on 26 June 1953. This day was to be a turning point in the history of the post-Stalin leadership. All the key figures in the country gathered at a meeting of the Presidium of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, which, according to protocol and a predetermined plan, was chaired by Malenkov himself. The atmosphere in the meeting room, located in the Kremlin, was electric, although outwardly everyone tried to remain calm. Every gesture, every word was significant. It was Malenkov who, opening the meeting, was the first to give the floor to Khrushchev to present his accusations against Beria. This move was carefully thought out. Formally, it looked like a normal discussion where one of the members of the Presidium expressed his concerns. Khrushchev began his speech by unleashing a barrage of accusations against Beria of anti-party activities, attempting to seize power, and carrying out reforms without proper coordination. A heated exchange ensued as Beria, accustomed to his unshakable position, tried to defend himself, interrupting speakers and appealing to his loyalty to the party and the state. The tension in the room reached its peak. It seemed that a single spark would be enough to set everything off. It was at this critical moment when the disputes reached their peak and it became clear that verbal battles would lead nowhere that Malenkov, as chairman, proposed to put the question of Comrade Beria's anti-party activities on the agenda. This was an official proposal that had to be supported by a vote, but its true purpose was different. According to the recollections of those who participated in those events, which later became part of history, it was Malenkov, sitting at the chair's table, who pressed a secret button. This button, hidden from prying eyes, was not just a signal. It was the trigger for a carefully planned operation. Immediately afterwards, a group of military officers led by Marshal Zhukov burst into the meeting room. These military officers, armed and determined, arrested Beria right there in the meeting room. For many of those present, it came as a shock, even though they were aware of the conspiracy. The moment of the arrest, when the all-powerful Beria was immobilized and led out of the room, remains in memory as one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the Soviet leadership. Remarkably, Beria was so confident in his unshakable power and, equally important, in Malenkov's loyalty, that he came to the meeting without his personal security detail, leaving them outside, behind the doors. He probably considered it a routine working meeting where his position was unassailable. He did not expect that Malenkov, his closest associate, with whom he had recently shared the podium and made important decisions, would be the one to set in motion the mechanism of his downfall.
It was a chess game in which Beria, accustomed to being a grandmaster, did not notice how his most loyal queen suddenly turned into a piece that checkmated him.